Hello and welcome to today's daily news analysis. So today is 3rd of Feb 2022. We are covering the Hindu newspapers Delhi edition. Now as part of our initiative, I make it a point to share questions for mains answer writing practice. So this will provide better contextual understanding. At the same time, it will help you with your prelims because for writing good answers, you need to quote facts and figures, committee reports, etc. So in that sense also, this will help you. Now you can get up to 2 answers evaluated per week for free. Okay, now we have questions on the marital rape. I have 2 questions, very similar actually, but the approach of answer will be different. Then electoral bond and imperial excess. So it's basically a critique on the governors. And more specifically, in the recent times, we have been seeing tensions between the West Bengal chief minister and the governor. It's interesting actually. Okay, now coming to the first news. So this is with reference to marital rape. Now before coming to this, let me explain the context. Right. So as we know that rape is a punishable offense. It is punishable the punishments are coming from section 376 of IPC. And rape is defined under section 375 of IPC. But then let's say when we are looking at forcible sexual intercourse between the husband and the wife or sexual intercourse without consent, then it is exempted. That means the marital rape is exempted from the definition of rape and therefore it has some sort of an immunity. It is decriminalized. So therefore we need to criminalize marital rape. Now, there is a petition being filed at the Delhi High Court where they are saying that the issue of marital rape, this exemption that has been provided, it is violative of women's dignity, equality and autonomy and violative of Article 15, 19 and 21 of the Constitution. Right. Here in the question I just have Article 21 of the Constitution. Okay, so we have this issue. And let me explain this part also, that it is antithetical to women's dignity, equality and autonomy. I'm just considering the women's point, then I'll come to the issues. So it is violative of women's dignity because it is not just that one person lives, but the person has to live with dignity. That is kind of a basic right that a person has, right? So it is violative of dignity, marital rape. Then equality. One way we can say that one person does not have the right to seek a recourse. In that way we can say that the state is discriminating. The state cannot discriminate on the points of one's birth. So in that way you can refer to Article 15 also. And then comes autonomy. Autonomy has to choose right or wrong, yes or no, consent issue. So when we look at the issue of marital rape, if it is not punishable, in a way we are saying that when a person gets into a contract, marriage is kind of a contract, so it is kind of an irrevocable consent, like consent is given, do whatever you want, something like that. So in that sense also this is problematic. It's violative of this value. Antithetical means violative of this value. So we have this woman's perspective. But then when it is this bad, why is the government not responding? Here comes the issue. So first of all, it says that even this, the statement that is given by the minister as well, it says that it will affect the institution of marriage. So this is problematic. Why? Let's say there is a conflict between a husband and a wife, there is a conflict between a couple, and who knows if the wife goes to the police and says that this so-and-so has raped me, my husband has raped me. So this may affect the institution of marriage in that regard. It may be misused. It may be misused from the vindictive point of view. So that is a problem. Then, okay, here again, the Law Commission also looked onto this issue, Law Commission 172nd report. So we cannot quote that the Law Commission recommended that exemption should be provided because we have the 172nd report which looked into the issue of reforming the criminal laws, and there it said that, see, this is a bad thing, but then because it will affect the institution of marriage, so we grant this immunity. We suggest the status quo that it should remain as such. Okay, so one is the issue of marriage. Now, if you look at this, the provision of misuse. Now, here we need to look as to what is the consent part. If was it the consent was taken or not. So that is there. So the proof that a consent was taken or the rape wasn't committed, so that part. And what is the interpretation of the consent? Is it a simple yes? Does one physically ask? What is this interpretation of consent? And who will have the burden of proving that so and so person is not guilty or so and so person has committed a crime? Who will share the burden of proof? These issues were also discussed at the National Commission on Women. These are the points from there only. So in the NCW also they said that, see, we know that it is a bad thing. It is nobody's case that marital rape should not be there. I mean, that should be punishable. But at the same time, we need to look into these aspects. And naturally, now when we look at the consent part and all those things, we are basically looking at the issue of investigation. Right? So these are the things. How do you investigate this? Because of the complications that are there. So we need to define some SOPs, some systems, so that we can ensure that this misuse doesn't take place. Okay, right, so these are the concerns. Now let's come back to the news. So basically, when all these issues have been going on with reference to the Delhi High Court and the National Commission of Women, and now the parliament has started. So the parliamentarians have the provision of asking questions to the government, question hour, then 0 hour. So in that regard, they said that what is the stand of government on this issue? They say that we are on the process of amending the criminal laws and then we'll get back to you. Oh no, please tell us about the marital rape. Please clarify the stand on marital rape. What is your stand? Right, so this you have to say. So then it said that it was a very cynical remark that had come, and it was basically about that institution of marriage will be affected. So this is the Minister of Women and Child Development. In fact, UPA government also had a similar stance. Then comes the Minister of Home Affairs, Minister of State, Junior Minister. So Mr. Ajay Kumar Mishra, he said that, see, we are at the moment we are taking the views of different stakeholders and then we'll see. But I feel that the thing is that we should provide the immunity. We should let the immunity be there. So that is what the government, I mean it reflects the view of the government. Now here we have two questions. So one is, discuss section 375 of the IPC with reference to its alleged violation of Article 21 of the Constitution. And the next question is actually the same thing, but there is no reference of the Constitution, right? So the second is the marital rape exception to the definition of rape, which is essentially section 375, is antithetical to women's dignity, equality and autonomy. Here you have to elaborate this point, you have to justify this point, you have to bring out the issue of the concerns over here from the point of view of women. Then you have to bring out the legitimate concerns and what course of action must be taken, the way forward. So this is how you will approach the second question. In the first question, right, the thing is that we have been asked this question specifically with reference to its constitutionality. Is it constitutional or not? Particularly from point of view of Article 21 of the Constitution, which is essentially right to live. And this right to live was elaborated further in the Menka Gandhi case, where it said that it is not just animalistic existence, it is not physical existence like a person breathes and eats food, not that life. That life has to be with dignity. That human dignity is key part of the right to life. And then this reference, when we look at, again, we are referring to the dignity part, we are referring to the aspect of equality again, to treat everybody equally, not to discriminate. That is again a component of right to life with dignity, human dignity and autonomy. Clear? So these things are there. So here you have to be more into this definition of Article 21 of the Constitution, Menka Gandhi case. You have to refer to the judgments of the Supreme Court as to we are looking at the constitutionality. Is it violative of Article 21 of the Constitution. So here is the representation of Article 21. Here is what the Supreme Court had said in the Menka Gandhi case. This is for your reference actually. Then here I have certain judgments. So there was this case known as Independent Thought versus Union of India, in which the Supreme Court criminalized rape with a minor wife. So if you can do this, if this is violative of Article 21, why not lie with a major wife? Now this the court has to explain. Right. So one issue is this. Then we have a judgment with reference to privacy. So Puttaswamy case, which says that right to privacy is a fundamental right. Now when you are looking at the marital issue between the husband and the wife, you are getting into the aspect of privacy as well. But then Puttaswamy judgment also provides for the grounds of state interventions on the issue of privacy. Right, so privacy must not be to cover, conceal patriarchal mindsets. So even this marital rape is kind of that man has kind of a power or a consent, irrevocable consent over his wife. And this was stated in the Joseph Shine versus Union of India case, all the recent judgments I'm referring to. So this was with reference to adultery, that is a husband having, between a couple, a person is having relations with another person's wife. Adultery. So we are not referring to that particular per se, but we are basically referring to what the judge had said, what the things we can use for our argument with reference to marital rape. So it says that, when marriage does not imply a universal, irrevocable consent for sex, and that without his marriage cannot survive. Right? So irrevocable consent, so that is not there as part of the marriage. So we need to look into this aspect. This again the court has said, and again these Supreme Court is essentially the court of record. So this has some legitimacy from the point of view of law, and that this has to be considered in when the cases are being fought, or when the government or anybody is interpreting law. Okay. Then we have other countries have removed it. Why do we have this? So we have borrowed this. Indian Penal Code is coming from the Britishers, and the Britishers had this provision that the history of the pleas of the crown, which it said that in 1736 that the husband cannot be guilty of rape committed by himself upon his lawful wife, because by their mutual matrimonial consent and contract, the wife hath given herself up to his kind, up to her husband. So that thing is gone, that notion, that concept is gone, and the British itself has overruled this. And there are at least 78 countries that have, including Nepal, who have criminalized marital rape. So what is the problem in India's case? Right? So if others are able to do, isn't it that marriages are not functioning in other countries? So that institution of marriage thing is not justified when you look at this. So, and if you want to say, we can also say that we can reform, you can bring out those points, we can also talk about the learnings from the other countries as a point. Okay, yesterday we did this. Narega budget has come down, but we have reports. The government itself has said in the Rajya Sabha that rupees 3,358 crores in Narega wages have not been paid. Right? Personally find this very unethical, because these are all from the marginalized community. They are the ones who are seeking work, and they should be paid in a timely manner. And when you have gotten work from them, you have got them to do work, then you should pay them also and in a time bound manner. And actually that is the reason why people don't turn up for Narega work even when they need help from the government. Okay. Next one is with reference to the electoral bonds. So electoral bonds worth 1,213 crores sold in January, and we're not concerned with this. What we are concerned with this is that we have this idea, and here's the question. The recently introduced electoral bonds are not without its shortcomings. Briefly discuss the various perspectives on electoral bonds with suitable suggestions. I have a video on this channel also. So electoral bonds on my channel, you can find it. It's a detailed analysis, but briefly I'll explain. See, electoral bonds as a concept, when people want to fund the government, people want to provide funding to the government. So the issue arises, there was a concern of black money being given to the government, and by government I mean the political parties, not the government, I'm sorry, the political parties. So black money, the money was coming from the form of cash. Then the other concern was when people were paying via checks, then their identity was being revealed, and it was possible that the political parties who didn't get the funding from those people, they may be harassed. So now, as a counter to this, the government has come up with a solution known as electoral bonds. So what can be done is, we have SBI. So of all the public sector banks, only SBI from where one can get electoral bonds. So let's say somebody wants to give money to a particular political party. So it will have to buy the electoral bonds from the State Bank of India, some designated branches of SBI. And it can be bought in denominations of 1,000, 10,000 and likewise. So they pay the bank money, they will get the bond of that amount. And this bond can be used also for tax deduction. Now in this, from the SBI, the money that has been parked, the political parties can claim. Clear? Tax deduction can become. So this is the concept of electoral bonds. Now the concerns with this is that it is having anonymity. So we do not know the sources of political funding that is coming. Now political parties that are functioning, we need to know who is paying them money, because ultimately they may form the government, or they may be in the opposition, they may raise their voice. So we should know as to who has funded that party, because the funding that has come it's quite possible that it may be setting the agenda for those political parties. In fact, that is what the Chief Information Commissioner, CIC, had also said. So I have a point actually that RTI, political parties should be included in the RTI. We'll come to that later. That's where the space. Okay, so the issue of anonymity is there. Then there is a concern that because of this, it can be used as a conduit, like a path or a pipe, from where people can source black money, right? So black money can be made legitimate. So electoral bonds has actually, when electoral bonds was introduced, the government relaxed the provisions that the foreigners can also provide funding to the political party. So it can enable the round tripping of black money. So money laundering can be facilitated. So this is a legitimate concern, right? Then not all political parties can get access to electoral bonds. So it is only those parties which have secured, it is those parties that are registered under section 29 of the Representation of People's Act, and who have at least gotten 1% of their votes, 1% of the votes from the general election, right? And likewise there is some value for local state elections. So only those parties are there. So that means not all parties are part of it. So now what suggestions can be given to the government with reference to the electoral bonds? So what steps can be taken? There is a definite need for regulation of this. Then we need to reconsider the issue of anonymity, because with anonymity we are moving out of accountability. We also want political parties to be accountable, and we need to know who has given money to which particular political party. In foreign countries it takes place. Okay, so this is there. Then we need to, in this context also, we need to introduce the concept of RTI to the political parties as well. And it should be made eligible for all political parties, new political parties as well. Now coming to Fitch Ratings flags high fiscal deficit targets. So there are basically some credit rating agencies like Fitch Ratings. So they basically assess the performance of the countries, they assess the fiscal health of the countries, and based on that they rate if a particular country is invest worthy or not. So they set benchmarks for the investors. Now let's say somebody wants to invest in a country. So if the country like India is rated badly, then in that case it becomes more difficult to get credit and other approvals for investment into India. Now in this reference, this agency has flagged high fiscal deficit target. So it has flagged this. So let's come to this. So fiscal deficit, as you know, as we did earlier also yesterday, it is the difference between the money that the government is spending and the revenues that it expects to generate, both from capital as well as revenue point of view. So capital account as well as revenue account. Okay. So the fiscal deficit target has been set at 6.4% of the GDP, whereas they were expecting 6.1%, they were anticipating, but it is at 6.4%. And to be honest, if you look at, it is actually 6.9%, and they hope that if they are able to sell some stake in the LIC, then this will improve to 6.4%. Okay, now why is this bad? So high fiscal deficit. So the thing is that when you are spending more than the revenue, that means you have to borrow this money. It could be within the country or from the outside. So you are borrowing, and when you borrow money, let's say you borrowed 1,000 rupees. So on that 1,000 rupees, on that principal amount, you also have to pay the interest amount. Right. So one thing is that you are not able to manage your budget well, but it also means that now you have to pay additional interest. And when you remember, when you looked at the budget, breakout of the budget, interest component was the biggest outgo or expenditure of the government. So this is very, very poor. So this actually amounts to huge debt of the government, and therefore huge interest, and therefore the state loses out. It loses out on the prospects of spending more on the capital creation of the capital, or in terms of spending for the welfare of the people. So in that regard, it gets affected. So therefore, we have high debt as a percentage of GDP. So high debt to GDP ratio. So a limit has been set, an ideal limit by N.K. Sharma committee report, N.K. Singh committee report. Okay, so high debt to GDP ratio, we have an high interest outgo, and when you are spending more than what you are getting, you're basically putting more money in the economy. This is also a way of fiscal stimulus. So in that case, when you have more money then in the economy, that means it will be more inflationary. And we can also add to it, it may also lead to devaluation of the currency. That is, your currency does not hold the same value. You'll not be able to buy the same amount of goods from that currency value. Okay, so we are at fiscal deficit, and fiscal deficit includes expenditure, which is also the debt that the government has taken minus the revenue. Then comes the primary deficit. Primary deficit is when you remove the interest component. When you remove the interest component from the fiscal deficit, that becomes the primary deficit. So FD minus I. Then comes revenue deficit. So revenue deficit means, the money that the government spends on day-to-day activities like payment of salaries, fuel, military, etc. So routine activities. No asset is being created. So in that case, when your revenue is not able to make up for you're spending more than what the revenue is coming to you. So in that case, that is revenue deficit, and that is the worst thing, because you're creating a debt obligation, and this debt is not creating any asset for you. So that it is not creating an asset. So in that way, it is a bad thing. In fact, this is the worst thing actually. Revenue deficit, high revenue deficit. Okay, now there is another concept known as effective revenue deficit that was introduced around, based on the recommendations of Rangarajan committee report, and the finance minister was former President Pranab Mukherjee. So effective revenue deficit basically says that there are certain money that the government spends as grants to the state. So money has to be given to the states. Now, as part of this money that has gone as grants, it will be used for revenue expenditure, right? Again, the day-to-day routine activities of the state, and part of it would be used on making some capital. So some infrastructure would be getting created because of that. So it says that such component which is being used on creation of capital assets should be deducted from the revenue deficit. So that is effective revenue deficit. And then comes the then comes the budgetary deficit, which is basically the difference of all receipts and expenses in both revenue and capital account of the government. Now you would say that this is very similar to the fiscal deficit. But when you remove the borrowing component, the money that the government has borrowed, or the debt component, then that is the budgetary deficit. So that is the difference between the fiscal deficit and the budgetary deficit. Now again, important from prelims point of view, this is with reference to the state of Jammu and Kashmir. So there is a delimitation commission likely to get another extension. I'll explain what is this concept. So, as the name also goes, delimitation, it means to mark boundaries. So, delimitation commission's primary responsibility is to mark or delimit the boundaries. Boundaries of what? Boundaries of constituencies. So, when elections are to take place, for example, let's say the state of Jammu and Kashmir was made into a UT. So we have a Union Territory of Jammu with a legislature, Union Territory of Kashmir with the legislature, and then UT of Ladakh with no legislature. So in that case, there was a need felt to create constituencies, right? So things have changed now. So constituencies have to be created. So constituencies means, the boundaries of the constituencies, that is who all can vote for a particular candidate. Okay, so constituencies have to be created. So for that purpose, Article 82 of the Constitution empowers the Parliament to establish delimitation commissions. It can be for the entire country or it can be for a particular region, like we have the Union Territories of Jammu and Kashmir. Right, so this is there. So time to time, delimitation commissions are to be formed. So for J&K, it had been formed, and job was to create this in a time-bound manner, but they have gotten extension. Now the problem with this delimitation commission is essentially that it's quite divided. The people, especially in the Kashmiri political parties, and because of the revocation of Article 370, there is lack of confidence. And therefore the parties from Kashmir particularly are not very open. They are not cooperating basically. So that is the concern over here. Furthermore, they created a first draft and is planning to make its draft proposal public this month from J&K party, civil society and citizens. Okay, so all that explanation is coming. The commission came into being by virtue of an act of the parliament, right? So same thing. And because of the changes in the law, J&K Reorganization Act was passed. So in that itself, it said that a delimitation commission would be made. Okay, so from prelims point of view, you have this thing that Article 82 provides for it, but then it is created by an act of a parliament. That is, it is a statutory body. Now, what if the delimitation commission sends a report, then what happens? This is again important. When the delimitation commission sends a report, where will it go? It will go to the Lok Sabha and it will go to the State Legislative Assembly. Right? It will go before them. And this delimitation commission, like this commission has 3 people. So this has to be passed in this respective houses. It has to be passed by the Lok Sabha actually. More importantly in the Lok Sabha, because this even with reference to the State Reorganization Act, it is just for their approval. It is not like the constituencies are being created by the parliament itself. It is their prerogative. But it is for them to discuss, debate, pass a resolution on, that's all. Give feedback to the parliament. Okay, now coming back to the Lok Sabha thing. So when we look, when the Lok Sabha, let's say Lok Sabha feels that, you see, we are not happy with this. You have created the constituency, we are not happy with the boundaries. So no modifications can be made to that. Whatever the commission has said, that is final. No, the modifications are not permitted. Right, so this is about the delimitation commission. So this is, you know about the task, you know that this is a statutory body and modifications are not permitted. Now we are coming to the editorial, and here I have a question for you on the Office of Governor. So Office of Governor has been a source of friction between center-state relations. Briefly suggest suitable remedial measures. Okay, so let's look at the issues over here first of all. So first of all, we have the Chief Minister of Bengal, right? So with reference to Bengal, what we find is that the governor has been interfering in the state affairs of the government. So governor has been has been summoning the officials like Chief Secretary and the Director General of Police. You know, when we look at the office of governor can seek feedback from the Chief Minister of the state. So it can seek feedback, but then here we find that he's summoning the officials on a regular basis, which is violative of this principle, because governor again is the nominal head of the state. Ultimately, it was the people who elected the chief minister, and if people are not happy with the governance, they will vote out the chief minister. So the chief minister and the elected representatives are accountable to the masses, citizens of that place. Then taking to the Twitter and discrediting the chief minister or the performance of the state. So all of this, you know, this reflects an open this thing that both are not on the same page. And yes, somewhere we can see some sort of an obstructionist approach. So this is there. Now I don't know who's right or wrong, but definitely this is a source of center state problem, right? Okay, then we have Maharashtra, where we see that the governor has stalled the election of speaker on the ground that how should the speaker be elected. Then we have the governor of Tamil Nadu, R.N. Ravi. By the way, this person is the same person who negotiated the NACA Accord. So here they have an issue with the NEET. So the Tamil Nadu government, they believe that the NEET exam is the central exam now. So it is intruding into the state domain. So it is intruding into the state domain. So they want to pass a law countering the law on NEET. So they want to overcome that. So the R.N. Ravi is using his veto power in that regard. Now let me add certain more issues over here with reference to governor, because this is very limited. So we have one more issue we can add is that use of emergency provisions 376 and imposing president's rule. Then with reference to the hung assembly, the governor tends to favor that particular political party in the state which is in the center. So that is seen especially with reference to Maharashtra, we saw, right? So this is there. Then we see interference also, seeking information. Seeking information is fine, but here it is somehow public confrontation that we see. So by and large, if we see all the problems that are coming over here with reference to center state problems, with reference to the office of governor, it is coming from discretionary powers of the governor. That comes from Article 163 of the Constitution. So here is the 163 of the Constitution, which provides for Council of Ministers who aid and advise the governor, and that again means that the governor is a nominal head. So governor only works in accordance with this, and that makes sense because governor is the appointee, he's not elected. Okay. Now this provides for the discretionary powers. So the governor in discretion, in certain situations, let's say if there is a hung assembly, so there is nobody able to stake claim on the positions of chief minister, council of ministers, then in that case the governor has the rightful discretion, right? Then we have with reference to the president's rule also imposition. It is up to the governor's discretion. So the governor takes a note of the issues and then reports to the president that, see, we should have president's rule. So that is again a discretionary power. The governor's right to seek information of the from the chief minister is fine, but then summoning from time to time, again this is a discretionary power. Now the thing again arises over here is that we see that this problem again is coming from the Constitution itself. It's the one is that we see that it is to do with the obviously center state, but the problem is coming that the Constitution has not defined as to what are the discretionary powers of the governor. We know, okay, fine, in these cases are there, but then let's say if there is a question arises that is it rightful that a governor is using this discretionary power, or to what extent they can use it, so that is not defined. So it all says that if there is a question of this issue, on the issue of discretionary power of the governor, then the decision of the governor is final. So that benchmark, that parameter has not been fixed. So this creates possibilities of abuse, right? Now don't use the word abuse. A possibility of confrontation. So the office of governor has been a source of friction between center-state relations. Right, you can explain. First of all, the governor has been appointed by the center into the states, and with reference to the governor, he is appointed by the president, and his term is not secure. It is up till the time he enjoys the pleasure of the president. Right, so that is there. So in that way also it affects the autonomous functioning of the governor. Okay, so we have source of friction. You can mention some issues over here that I listed. Then you can mention the issue of Article 163 specifically with reference to the discretionary powers. Then what suitable measures need to be taken. So I have some measures. Actually, it's very simple. In your polity also it must be there, but not elaborated. So first of all, we have some committees that were formed to look into the issue of center-state relations. And Sarkaria Commission is there. Then we have the Punchi Commission. So Sarkaria is the latest one. So Sarkaria Commission looked into it, and it said that this governor that we appoint should not be affected by the issues of politics, should be neutral. So some guidance was given with reference to the appointment of the governor. It should not be a person from the same state, because if you are from the same state, then you may be affected. You are interested in the politics and you want the votes of the people. Then you will be in confrontation with the chief minister. So this was there. Then in the Nabam Rabia judgment, the Supreme Court said that the Article 163, which provides for the discretionary power, this cannot be unlimited. This is a limited power, and it should be actuated by good and tempered by good sense and tempered by caution. Right, so this discretionary powers should be used sparingly. So this is there. Then we have the ARC report. Then we have Sarkaria also. Then there is Chelliya Commission also, which said that this Article 356, that is the emergency provision or the president's rule, should be used in matters of last case resort. Again, it didn't say it should be abolished, but it should be last case resort. Right, so these are certain issues you can refer to. So again, when we say that when I am quoting recommendations, that implementation of that recommendations is the suggestion, is the way forward. Now here is the opinion of the British High Commissioner to India, who says that if India and Britain ink the free trade agreement, so if both countries get into a free trade agreement, which essentially means that both countries provide each other preference in matter of trade. It allows for free movement of trade, free movement of people from one country to another. It means access to markets. It also means allowing the movement of capital. So that in that way, if that is done, if this cooperation is realized, then both the economies, both the countries will greatly benefit. So here it says that, first of all, both countries have been, people of both countries have been investing in each other. So we have UK based companies who have been investing in a country. So that means there is capital formation, and that means there is creation of jobs. And likewise, there are companies like ESA Group, Ola Electric, etc., who have been investing in UK. Right? So this is there. So capital comes, with capital comes the jobs. Then it will obviously give an impetus to growth and employment in both countries, right? So growth and employment takes place again with capital only. Then comes that if both countries work together, then it will diversify the supply chains. So supply of raw material, supply of goods. So both, let's say British made companies get access to the supply chains from India, and likewise Indian companies get access to supply chain from UK. So in that way it will benefit. And when this supply chain thing improves because of this, then we may see improve in quality, we will see improvement, variation and affordability of products. And when both countries work together, it is very, very important that they have some sort of a regulatory certainty, right? British companies want to work in India or they want to invest, they need to have regulatory certainty. And if possible, both would want to improve the regulatory certainty so that they are at the same level playing field. So they are at the same level. Now we all know that in the Indian regulatory, at least in our country, we don't know about UK, but our regulatory is a bit in a bad state of affairs. So that creates a problem for a country. So if the regulatory side is improved, even those companies who in India who do not want to actually, who are not associated with the UK trade, they still stand to benefit because the regulatory regime within the country will improve. Now I'll come to the politics behind this from the map here. So see, basic thing is that why we are so interested. Yes, it's a big economy, but it's a very small also in terms of population. Market access it's not in that way also important. Okay, so basic thing is that India still wants to have a free trade agreement with European Union. So the entire Europe essentially speaks in one voice. It is kind of a union, right, where there is free movement of people, free movement of trade. There is also a common currency known as euro. So we want to have an agreement with them, and that will greatly benefit our economy. But we have certain problems. For example, they want an access to market access for dairy, farm products. They have a surplus while they have a surplus basically of whatever they're cultivating. The population density is less, so they want to find new markets. But when they export it into our country, the farm prices will come down. It will not be good for the farmers. Our dairy will get affected, right? So even milk can be exported. So this is a problem. Then I'm just listing a few. These countries have great automobile companies, Mercedes, you name it. All these companies are there. So they want concessions from our country. They want it at least as to what is there in the Europe. But ours is because we want to promote Make in India. Our we have a high import duty because we want to attract investments within the country, which they are not okay with. So there are a number of issues which we also have with them, because of which we are not able to come to the free trade agreement. Now, UK was part of the European Union, but because of the Brexit, UK is separate. So if UK decides, if we can get an entry into the UK, this could be our entry point into European Union, because this UK is isolated at this moment, not really isolated, but not part of EU. So its economy was affected back then. So it may be more vulnerable, and our possibilities of getting a favorable trade deal improves. So that is the thing. In fact, we are also trying to have relations with the Latin American countries, because they share culture from the Spain and the Portuguese. So that could also be our inroads into the European Union. Children's share in union budget has come down to 11-year low. I was referring to this, so I was correlating with the times from a different paper. So they said that all this TOI and HDCC, it's very, very progressive. I don't know whom to believe here. Anyways, so when they're talking about the budget plummets, so here I have these schemes which are important for exam, which were referred here. Right. So we have 3 schemes. So Ministry of Women and Child Development have classified their schemes under 3 broad headings. So this is Saksham Anganwadi and Poshan 2.0. So Saksham Anganwadi is to enhance the capability of the Anganwadis, whose job is to implement the ICDS. Right, so all those things. And again, Poshan is to do with the nutrition related support. So all of this are part of this initiative over here. Okay, then comes Mission Vatsalya. Vatsalya means affection. So affection towards children who have been affected or who are on the wrong side of the law. I'm just making this up. I don't know if this is true, but right, I'm trying to correlate. So children who are on the wrong side of the law, for them, welfare activities. So these schemes are coming under, there are two schemes. So they are coming under Vatsalya. And then we have Mission Shakti, so mission for protection and empowerment of women. Now there are two components. So one is Sambal and the other is Samarthya. Yeah, so this is to do with the mission for protection and empowerment. So for women's safety and empowerment, to do good for the women. So there are two components over here, right? So basically the world should be open, it should be safe for the women to participate, to live without fear. So that is the Sambal component. So if they have a problem, they can go to the one-stop center. There should be Mahila Police Volunteer, Swadhar, Ujjwala, widow homes. Then Samarthya is to do with women contribute to the economy to safeguard for the welfare of the women. So we have Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, which is basically a slogan. Creche scheme. Now this is again coming from the Poshan 2.0. This thing also has National Creche scheme. Then Pradhan Mantri Matru Vandana Yojana. This is to do with maternity. Matru Vandana. Okay, Matru. Gender budgeting. A question was asked in prelims 2015. So what do you mean by this gender budgeting? So gender budgeting is essentially a component where, when let's say the budget is being prepared, it's not really an accounting exercise, but it basically means that when a budget is being prepared, we are budgeting as to what resources would be required for the women. So we are basically factoring in women while making schemes and policies. It's not really an accounting exercise, it's just that we are taking them into account, into whatever scheme, whatever measures are being taken. Then with research, and this is basically a screenshot, nothing is missing as such. And then there is the scheme known as National Rural Health Mission. This component has come down, National Rural Health, and reproductive child health. So this budget has been reduced. So Mission Vatsalya is there, then Anganwadi is there. Then they have said that we are going to focus on one class, one TV channel, right? So this will be done, and this will be providing them education in regional languages, which the civil society group is not very happy with, because they feel that according to various surveys, they have found that this means of education is not very effective, right? So this essentially covers our newspaper analysis for 3rd of February. So you can again watch our budget video also, so which was there uploaded yesterday. So that will be really helpful for your GS3 preparation. Lot of questions made for mains answer writing practice were present. Right then, so this is it from my side. Bye bye, take care and all the best.